So I hope you're beginning to appreciate the very important, crucial roles that functions play in various different settings for different purposes. And by and large, not necessarily trying to compactize the program or to make the function run faster. That's not the point. Sometimes we are fortunate to also enjoy those benefits, but those are not really the goals or the reasons why we make functions. Now let's talk about the scoping of the function name itself. We have talked about the scoping rules for the variables that are defined inside the function. And I kind of like brush through and say, you just call the detect prime, is prime, and just run it. And typically, we will, when I say we, it just means the larger programming community, will just define functions at the global space. So in other words, the DEF will align with position 1 or position 0, if you choose to say it that way. However, one interesting behavior allowed by Python and is not discouraged. In fact, you can use it. Is to make functions private functions. So we can define private functions by having a define inside a function. So we are defining a function, but inside somehow we have the need to define functions, right? Now, normally in other languages like C, you might, or C++, you might have to define this function outside and then kind of like restrict all other functions or other programs from calling dash out, because dash out is your own local private function definition that is only used locally, used only one time, used only for very special occasions that only this function encounters and whatsoever. And it's not meant for your larger global program codes to call upon. So if you put it out there in the global scope, there's a chance or you're allowing other programmers to be calling dash out, which might not be a good thing, right? So the idea is to locally scope the dash out. So in other words, when we locally scope the dash out, like this case here, the highlighted orange highlighted space here, then dash out can only be seen by programming codes that are inside the detect prime, its parent container. Okay, you get that? So it's like a container containing a container and so on. So uh, I'm just telling you what can be done here, right? We will talk about what does this mean and why should we do that and so on. So the reason why we do this is that dash out here makes sense or is contributing to clarity of code only within this function. Maybe because this function is really long. All right, this function is very complicated. This function is very hard to understand, and so it's better to segmentize certain uh, logic to give them a meaningful name so that it can be better understood, and so on and so forth. There are various reasons why we might want to do that, and Python allows for private functions in that sense. Now, this private, I put quote and unquote because it's not exactly the same behavior as private methods as used in object-oriented programming, but close enough, right? Close enough. And the whole point is you can only use this function within its parent container. Now, some of you are thinking very quickly, can I define more deeper level functions within these private locally scoped functions? And the answer is yes, of course, right? You can do that. And it is also allowed by Python, but in practice, I seldom see or encounter the need to do third level function definition, fourth level function nested within third level, fourth level, fifth level. And the deeper you scope them, the more complicated the logic might become. And then it defeats the purpose of trying to simplify the logic of your function. Yeah. So although it's allowed, technically we don't try to abuse it. So this is typically used for defining locally meaningful assistant functions, right? So dash out is just to help tech prime to finish its job nicely, finish its job in a clear way, and by no means meant to be exported, to be used by the rest of your program. Okay, so private functions cannot be called out by other programs, by global codes using detect prime dot dash out, this kind of sub-referencing mechanism. For class, object-oriented classes and instances, you are supposed to be able to do that. In fact, that's the beauty. That's meant to be, but not for this. All right, so it's sort of um, uh, introductory curiosity that I introduce this to you, that we will be allowed to subscope the function, okay, by defining more local functions. So it's somewhere here. Okay, so detect prime, right? We can say, what was it? Dash out, num list and position. Dash out. So we say def of dash out, num list and position. So this dashes out the uh, pause position value of number list. Okay, so that we just simply say num list at position is equal to dash. So now instead of having this list of ins equals to dash, now of course we can understand, and I hope you can understand, because it's really simple. We just assign a string to clear it out, but it could have been several lines of statements to calculate some average total, and then make sure you assign the delta of the calculated difference from the average, and then assign it back. Some complicated calculations to do it. Well, we don't have to have long list of codes to be performed here like this, right? Suppose we need to dash out many things. We don't have to list them all out here. We can simply just say clear out position 5, so clear out position I. And so we can say dash out list of ins, right, at position I. And what to dash can always be localized to dash out function itself. If we don't like hyphen, we prefer dot, because it looks neater, it looks less intrusive. We can always do that. Then it becomes very clear, because we don't really, dot or not is not really the important thing, right? The important thing is our logic says we want to clear out that position. We can put a space there, we can put a dot there. That is by the way discussion. So when we run it, I need to basically revert this back to modify numbers itself, and we see that we can actually clear out the space with a dot, or if you prefer, double spaces, and that would make it really dashing out. Yeah. So all these are basically the roles and performances of dash out, not the line itself. The line itself here is to say remove it out of my sight, right? How you remove it is what dash out needs to do. So you see that when you break down the rows into this level, dash out tends to be quite lean and mean, right? It seldom would have a further need for dash out to be so long that it has to have its own further locally scoped functions on its own again. Because by then, if you have a need for a third level definition, you might want to consider bringing dash out to another module, because it's really getting very complicated. Okay, so those are the tricks and means that we have on hand to deal with complicated cases.